that's lie to him.
I won't call him.
was so, my gosh. Jen like leaned over and she was like, are you okay? I was like, no, I'm not okay.
$5 can you throw in a hat?
Stick it through. I mean, how much you're buying? Yes.
Thank
Ooh, it's nice and cool. You like that?
Look at it. No, the first time.
Thank